This video is for section 8.1 about molecular compounds. The learning goal is to be able to use a molecular formula. Let's take a look at that learning goal. In the last chapter, we explored ionic compounds. They were formed when metal cations and nonmetal anions were attracted to each other in a structure called a crystal. The attractions were called ionic bonding. In this chapter, we'll examine compounds that don't involve attractions between ions. Instead, nonmetal atoms are joined together through covalent bonding. So ionic compounds usually involve metals joining with nonmetals. Molecular compounds involve nonmetals joining with other nonmetals. A covalent bond refers to the force of attraction between the nuclei of two atoms and electrons that are shared by both atoms. In the last chapter, we discussed ionic bonds. Those were forces of attraction between positively charged ions and negatively charged ions. So you can see that a covalent bond is different from that. This is a force of attraction between the nuclei of atoms and electrons that are shared between the atoms. A molecule is a neutral group of atoms joined together by covalent bonds. In the last chapter, when ions joined together by ionic bonds, the structure that was created was called a formula unit of an ionic crystal. So you can see that in this section, the structure that's created is called a molecule. A diatomic molecule is a molecule consisting of two atoms. For example, if a hydrogen atom is bonded to another hydrogen atom, then that molecule would have a total of two atoms. It would be a diatomic molecule. A molecular compound is a collection of molecules. A molecular compound that you're very familiar with is water, H2O. A molecular formula is the chemical formula for a molecule. It's the representative unit of a molecular compound. The molecular formula indicates how many of each atom make up the molecule. Do you know the molecular formula for water? It's H2O. Here are some example molecular formulas that indicate what atoms are bonded together to create these molecules. Along with the molecular formulas, there are also some diagrams. Our first example is H2. That's the molecular formula. It's diatomic hydrogen. This first picture shows what that looks like in space. The blue circles with the positive ones are the nuclei of two hydrogen atoms that are squeezed very close together. The two black dots are the two electrons that are shared in between the hydrogen atoms. Because electrons are negatively charged, there will be a force of attraction between these electrons and this nucleus, and similarly, attraction between these electrons and this nucleus. That force of attraction is called a covalent bond, and it's what holds together the two hydrogen atoms. This diagram here with the capital H, and the two dots in between is a dot formula for diatomic hydrogen. Remember that each dot represents a valence electron. So this picture shows that there are two electrons being shared with each of the hydrogens. This picture right here, which is a lot like the dot picture, uses a dashed line to represent the shared pair of electrons. So a dashed line represents a covalent bond. It's the same thing as having two dots. This one is called a structural formula. It attempts to show with symbols the same thing that this more realistic picture is showing up here. The second example is H2O, a water molecule. Here's the structural formula of a water molecule. It has the two hydrogens, which are covalently bonded to the oxygen atom. This dashed line represents a shared pair of dots. So does this one. So in total, how many valence electrons are associated with the oxygen? There are 8 of them. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Remember that each dashed line counts as 2 dots. This next one is NH3, which is called ammonia. Here is the structural drawing for that. And it's been drawn in a particular way. Instead of just drawing the N with dashed lines coming out like this, and then showing the unshared electron pair on top, instead of drawing it like this, it's been drawn with a perspective drawing to create the illusion of what its three-dimensional shape really looks like. Ammonia is a pyramid-shaped molecule. So by drawing this dash here so that it gets a little thicker on this end, it creates the illusion that it's coming towards our body. By drawing this dash using the little dotted line like that, it creates an illusion that that hydrogen is going back into the distance. This is a perspective drawing, creating an illusion that the molecule is a pyramid. Whereas this type of drawing doesn't show us the pyramid shape of ammonia. In this class, when you're working with molecular compounds, you need to be able to write molecular formulas, which involve the element symbol as well as the little numbers. You need to be able to draw dot diagrams, where you use dots to show the valence electrons. And you need to be able to draw structural formulas, where you use dashed lines to represent shared pairs of electrons. Here are some check for understanding questions. I'll pause the video for you to work on these, and then we'll discuss them before continuing. And before we continue to the next part, here are my answers to question 1. If the formula is CCl4, then there is 1 carbon atom, and there are 4 chlorine atoms. Now we're asked for the dot structure diagram. I drew a capital C to represent the carbon atom in the middle, and then in the 4 directions, north, south, east, and west, I wrote Cl, which is the symbol for chlorine. In between the carbons and the chlorines, I put 2 dots to be the shared pair of electrons. Please remember that even though they're not shown, each of the chlorines has additional valence electrons. For instance, the chlorine on the left not only has the shared pair with the carbon, but up above there are 2 dots, on this side 2 dots, and underneath 2 dots. So that the chlorine atom also ends up with a complete octet. And that's true for all 4 of those chlorine atoms. The structural diagram is the same as the dot diagram, but the shared pairs were replaced with the dashed lines. And again, the chlorine atoms have unshared electron pairs around them. So with the 2 dots represented by the dash, along with a pair here, and a pair here, that chlorine has 8 valence electrons, a complete octet. The perspective drawing is very similar to the structural drawing, but I wanted to create the illusion of a 3-dimensional shape called a tetrahedron. So in the middle I have carbon, and then to make it look like this chlorine on the bottom is coming out towards the paper, I didn't draw a dash line, but I made the line get a little thicker towards the bottom. And that was to create the illusion that it's getting wider or larger. It makes it look like it's coming out towards me. The chlorine on the top I just have going straight up above. For the chlorine here and the chlorine here, I didn't draw a regular dash line, but I created a little triangle symbol that starts wider by the carbon and gets narrower and narrower, creating the illusion it's going back into the distance. Next, number 2. The molecular formula for ethanol is C2H6O, because there are 2 carbons, 6 H's, and 1 O in that structural drawing. What does each dash line represent? It represents a shared pair of electrons, or another way to say that, it represents a covalent bond. Question C, how many valence electrons are associated with each carbon atom? Well, let's take a look at our drawing. And we might focus in on this carbon on the left. 2 electrons, 2 electrons, 2 electrons, and 2 electrons. There are 8 electrons around that carbon. And that's true for this carbon as well. How many electrons are associated with each hydrogen atom? Well, let's take a look at the drawing. Next to this hydrogen, there is a single dashed line. That's 2 electrons. Well, that's the same for this one, or this, 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 and this. All of the H's only have the single dashed line by them. So there are 2 electrons with each hydrogen. And now the oxygen. On the left side of the oxygen is the dashed line. That's 2 electrons. This is 2 electrons. But remember, even though it's not shown, there's an unshared pair here and here. So around the oxygen, there are 8 valence electrons. Are there any ions in ethanol? And the answer is no. Ethanol has covalent bonds. It does not have ionic bonds. Question E, redraw using a dot diagram. Every place where there's a dashed line, put 2 dots. So your picture will look a lot like this. It's just you'll have 2 dots here, 2 dots here, 2 dots here, and so on, instead of having those dashed lines. This concludes the video about molecules and covalent bonding.